little book reading for y'all today, so you know we got to go into the source. You feel me? Um, we're gonna read about Africa. You know what I'm saying? In the early colonial period. You feel me? Africa in the early colonial period. You know what I'm saying? And it's coming out of the World History book. This the advanced placement test. So you know it's accurate information in here. Amsco Publications. However, let me turn up the music a little bit. If y'all can't see me, I'm gonna come up a little bit. Give me a second here. Let me get set up. Woo. So I hope everybody had a blessed day, man. This is a nice little late night session. You know what I'm saying? I'm off work tonight, but tomorrow I gotta go get it. You feel me? Um. Plus, I'm working on material that I got coming up too as well. You know, dealing with history and the experience that we got over here as African Americans, however people want to make call or label themselves. But my belief is that, you know what I mean, from the records that my people got, you know, we came over here through the transatlantic slave trade. And my last name Clemens. So by looking that up, I know that the owners of my people came from out of Germany, and they migrated over here through the wars and the rules, and ended up in New York and migrated south and acquired my people. So that's how that worked. All right. So you look up the word Clemens, you'll see it originate from the word Clement, and it goes all the way out through Viking Age, all out through Europe and all of that crazy stuff they got going on over there. But tonight, this is about Africa. You know what I'm saying? It's getting to know the true you. You feel me? You wanna have that confidence of, so when somebody asks you who are you, you can tell them who you really are, what you stand for, because you riding on the blood and sweat and tears of your ancestors. You know what I'm saying? And that's very important. It also deal with the Pan-Africanism as well. You know what I'm saying? But even though we here in America, however, you still want to be able to stand 10 toes, you know what I'm saying, in your concrete cultural roots, you know what I'm saying, and the civilization that you ancestors originated from. So let's get into it. All right. Give me 1 second. Let me grab my coffee, and we finna get ready to rock, man. Trying to see, should I sit up? All right, I'm gonna try to sit up a little bit. If I get a little uncomfortable, you know, I'll let y'all know what it is. So let's get it in. Africa, in the early colonial period. Hold up, I got a little something going on right here.
Giving skip dance button. No matter what.
All right, let's go. Okay. My bad. Let me push this back. I'm all in y'all face, man. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, we rocking now. All right. Here we go. Africa in the early colonial period. Quote by the King Alfonso in a letter to the King of Portugal in 1526. He says, "We cannot reckon how great the damage is since the mentioned merchants are taking every day our native sons and the land and the sons of our noblemen and vassals and our relatives, because the thieves and men of bad conscience grab them, wishing to have the things and wares of this kingdom. You know, and King Alfonso wrote that to the king of Portugal. And it says in the quote above, King Alfonso of the Congo Kingdom was writing about the terrible devastation that the transatlantic slave trade wrought on his kingdom. The Atlantic slave trade was a pivotal development in the history of the African continent during the early modern era. It contributed to the decline of many West African societies, but it also had ripple effects across the entire African continent. The changes it brought would make African societies of the year 1450 almost unrecognizable by the year 1750. Wow. African civilizations at the beginning of the era. From the era 600 to about 1450 brought considerable change to Africa. South of the Sahara, the introduction of bananas from Southeast Asia spurred great population growth in North Africa, and in trading cities along the East Coast, Islam spread rapidly as a result of the phenomenal growth of the Abbasid Empire, centered in Baghdad, and the activities of Muslim merchants. Interactions among various cultures inside and outside of Africa brought extensive trade and new technology to the continent. The Songhai Empire. The Songhai people were the main ethnic group in and around the city of Gao. On the Niger River, Gao prospered through the trans-Saharan trade, but was eventually conquered by the Mali Empire. However, unrest among Malayan factions weakened the empire in the early 15th century. This allowed Gao to regain its independence. In 1464, Sunni Ali became ruler of the Songhai people and began to aggressively conquer territory on both sides of the Niger River, creating the Songhai Empire. Among Ali's conquests was Timbuktu, famous as a center of Islamic scholarship. Timbuktu was famous as a center of Islamic scholarship. Although a Muslim himself, Ali was not intensely devout, instituted repressive policies against some of the scholars there, particularly those associated with the peoples he had overthrown in his empire building the campaign. So he did, you know, let them continue with their own beliefs as well. It says by the 1480s, he had built an empire that surpassed that of the Mali Empire before him. The cause of Sunni Ali's death in 1492 is uncertain. According to some, he drowned while crossing the Niger River. Others contend that he was killed by a nephew, his sister's son, in a bid for power. Sunni Ali's nephew eventually took power. He was Askaya Muhammad, also known as Askaya the Great. He continued to expand and strengthen the empire, making it about as large as the state of Alaska. While Islam had been practiced widely in West Africa for generations, Askaya strengthened the religion in the region by building schools and mosques, as Mansa Musa had done 2 centuries earlier. You know, Mansa Musa was the king that, you know, over the first empire of Mali, richest in the world, you know. Okay. Now, it says, as Mansa Musa had done 2 centuries earlier, he traveled to Mecca with impressive quantities of gold, just as him. Like Islamic rulers in Spain, Askaya Muhammad practiced toleration of other faith. See, it's telling you they practiced tolerations of other faith, because Timbuktu at that time was a learning center for all cultures to come and learn, but mostly it was Islamic culture and the different aspects of Islam that they practiced on the west side of Africa. So, the Songhai Empire did not last long, only about 100 years, like many other empires in the world in this era. It fell to forces wielding a new weapon, firearms. In Songhai's case, the conquering forces were Moroccans from Northwest Africa. The conquering forces were Moroccans from Northwest Africa. Okay. Now we're getting into the Europeans arrive. European arrive. Certain regions of East and West Africa were the targets of European conquest. Let me get rid of this commercial right quick. All right. Now the Europeans arrived. It says certain regions of the East and West Africa were targets of European conquest during the late 15th century. Portuguese ruler Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator was keenly interested in navigational technology. He financed expeditions along Africa's Atlantic coast and around the Cape of Good Hope, exploring African coastal communities and kingdoms before other European powers. So he got there before other European powers because he was really interested in navigational technology. With the cooperation of local rulers, first Portuguese and then other European traders set up trading posts along Africa's coast. Some local rulers traded slaves to Europeans in exchange for gunpowder and cannons, giving those coastal governments a military advantage when battling neighboring villages. Thus, many African city-states grew wealthy by agreeing to sell enslaved Africans to European slaveries. The Dahomey in particular, so the Dahomey tribe in particular grew stronger because it raided other villages for slaves and sold them to European merchants. But you got to realize now, the Europeans brought the gunpowder game to us. You know what I'm saying? So it's the trickaroo game going on right there too as well. And also you got to look at the fifth factor that plays a big part in context right here. Okay. In Central West Africa, Portuguese explorers, traders, and missionaries made inroads, and this how they tried to get the Christianity in there with the missionaries. It's always a setup. You hear me? So and missionaries made inroads into the Congo and Benin kingdoms. Artwork from these societies bears signs of Europeans as well as African cultural influences. As early as the 16th century, Benin artisans incorporated images of the European intruder into their carvings and sculpture. In 1498, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama invaded the Swahili city states of East Africa, most of which were thriving commercial centers in Indian Ocean trade. The Portuguese took over trade in Kilwa, Mombasa, and other cities, states, throwing the region into a devastating decline. Now, the literature, as in many other regions of the world, Africa produced influential literary works in the 13th, 14th, and 15th century. The oral history passed along by the griots later became the basis for poetry and novels. The oral history passed along by the griots later became the basis for written poetry and novels. So they got a lot of their history from the griots. The griots was like the storytellers, and they held the mysteries and the things, the knowledge, the wisdom of the culture, and they would produce it through like art, storytelling, sing, dance, poetry, you know. Okay, so we're gonna go on some more. It says Africans and the Atlantic slave trade. Slavery existed in Africa, including the extensive enslavement of women as household workers. While before Europeans sought labor for their investments in the Americas, for example, in many societies, the entire community shared the land. In order to establish positions of wealth and power, individuals not only showcased the property they owned, but also showcased their slaves. Europeans were also not the first foreigners to seek out African labor. You know what I'm saying? It says, as discussed, also Arab merchants during the post classical era of 600 through 1400 often brought slaves during their travels to Swahili coast of East Africa. So even the Arabs, you know what I'm saying, brought us as slaves. And you know what I'm saying? And sometimes it click on me because they let them over here in America with no problem. You feel what I'm saying? So it's just crazy, man. However, it was the Atlantic slave trade that wreaked the most havoc on African societies. This deep, man, because it say, why the Africans though? You know what I'm saying? It say several factors converge to make Africa a target for slave raids by Europeans. After 1450, after 1450, in the year 1450, it says, as discussed in the previous chapter, slavery in Latin America and the Caribbean began toward the end of the 16th century, when European conquistadors sought fortunes in gold, silver, and sugar. Land was plentiful, but labor to make the land profitable was scarce. So they come to the land, but they ain't want to do the work. You know what I'm saying? And they put them a plan together. You know what I'm saying? To pretty much have us in fear by the new weapon, the new technology of the gunpowder, So now they need people to work these lands, so we can't get a hold of that kind of stuff. And the people that they traded us for, you know what I'm saying, because they wanted to maintain their power. And it was like a pyramid, you know what I'm saying. You got master, then you got the house man, then you got the field man. You feel what I'm saying? And when that gunpowder man came into play, it was over. You hear me? Because it was a new type of technology, nobody that we never saw. We people of nature. You feel me? And we was living off the land, and we produced what we produced. But however, at the end of the day, that was something new. We never saw that before. So, but even though we did fight, though, we didn't care about a lot of that stuff because we put up fights. You know what I'm saying? You had Shaka Zulu and them, the Zulu tribe. You know what I'm saying? And hold on.
Skip dance button.
You had the Mama tribe. You know what I'm saying? Mama. Okay, so let's get back to it though. It's a Europeans initially forced indigenous people, the Africans, to do the hard laboring of mining and farming. But European diseases wiped out large portions of these coerced labors. The indigenous slaves who survived found it easy to escape bondage because they were more familiar with the territory, had social networks that could protect them, and could easily camouflage themselves within native population. Repeated efforts to enslave Native Americans failed, although other efforts to coerce labor did have some success. Labor for plantations. Now we in North America. In North America, plantation owners recruited European indentured servants who would come to work for a specific period in exchange for passage, room, and board. However, most of these people, unaccustomed to the back-breaking agricultural working conditions and the climate of the Americas, in addition, indentured servants were required to work only for about 7 years. If they survived their indenture, they became free laborers. Thus, landowners did not think of indentured captives and European indentured servants as ideal workers. You know who those was? Those were the other white people that came over here to the Americas that, okay, y'all will be a slave, but you work 7 years, you're free. You know what I'm saying? And then you can do what you want to do. You feel me? But you ain't one of them. You feel me? So I'm just getting it to you raw. You know what I mean? During this era, Europeans sought sources of inexpensive labor in Americas. Western European countries such as Portugal, Spain, and England were developing their naval technology, but Portugal was ahead of others. In West Africa during the latter part of the 1400s, Portuguese trading fleets arrived in the Kingdom of the Congo seeking slaves. Initially, they took the enslaved Africans back to Europe to work as domestic servants. Triangular trade. The Europeans' desire for slaves in the Americas, coupled with Portugal's discovery of West Africa, meant that Africa became the source for new labor. African slaves soon became part of a complex global trading system that was called the Atlantic Trading System or the Triangular Trade, based on a trade cycle with three legs. One version of the triangular trade involved the transport of European manufactured goods such as firearms to West Africa, like I said, and from there enslaved Africans were shipped to the Americas, and the final leg would be that they would bring back the American tobacco and cash crops to Europe. Okay? Once the European nations noticed the success that the Portuguese enjoyed with sugar plantations in Brazil. The English, Dutch, and French worked to replicate that success in the Caribbean. By 1700s, sugar production and rum made from sugar were financing fortunes in Britain, and to a lesser extent in France and the Netherlands. Capture and shipment of slaves to the Americans. Listen, let's get deep right here. You hear me? Capturing Africans for slavery was invariably a violent affair. When African leaders along the coast realized that their kingdoms could economically benefit from the slave trade, they invaded neighboring societies in a quest for slaves to take back to the coast. At times, African rulers were also willing to hand over individuals from lowering rungs of their own societies. Because of this one thing, that firearm technology. You know what I'm saying? It says such prisoners of war servants are such of them, and mostly was prisoners of war, and some of them was servants or criminals. However, as King Alfonso suggested to the King of Portugal in the quotation that opens this chapter, slave raids were not easily controllable. Though he had initially allowed slave trading in his kingdom, he had no intention of giving up his society's elite to slavery. Nor did he want Congo to be depopulated. King Alfonso also saw that his authority was undermined because his subjects were able to trade slaves for European goods without his involvement. Before the Europeans came, he had been able to control all trade in his domain because of the simple fact when the Europeans came, they came with the fifth factor, which was the firearms, the new technology. So now he lost all control. So what they did was saying, listen, y'all ain't got to go to the king for protection. We gonna give y'all some protection, right? Here goes some guns, here goes some firearms. We just need some slaves that's criminals from y'all or something, cause they come with the technology game. You feel me? So the king can't really do nothing now because they done undermined him. You know what I'm saying? Now, captive Africans swept away from their families were taken to holding pens in West Africa known as barracoons or slave castles. The modern day country of Ghana has preserved these points of no return, where thousands upon thousands, maybe millions of Africans said goodbye to their homeland for the last time. Wow, man. Can you just imagine that? You know, you going away from your family to a whole nother world. You were taken away by force, by a new technology that you don't know nothing about. Wow. Okay. Today, tourists can visit one of such holding prisons, the so-called House of Slaves, on the east coast of no, it says on the slaves on the Goat Island of the coast of Senegal. Okay, okay, coast of Senegal. So that's like what Theophile Benga from, and the Dr. Theophile Benga and the great Dr. Cheek Anta Diop. Okay, so from these holding pens, traders next cramped their captives into dark cargo section of the ship, providing them little water, food, or even room movement. The grueling journey across the Atlantic was known as the Middle Passage because it was middle part of the captive's journey. Many captured Africans staged rebellions en route, but most revolts were crushed. Um, and then you had that film Amistad in 1997 that came out, uh, you know, in which Africans took control of the Spanish ship Amistad. They say during the journey to the Americas, which usually took about 6 weeks, up to half of the ship's captives might die. Historians estimate that over the hundreds of years of the Atlantic slave trade from early 1500s to the mid 19th century, approximately 25% of all African captives perished before reaching the Americas. Mm-mm-mm. So, we're finna go a little bit more deeper and say African presence in the Americas. Okay, African cultures were not completely lost once captives arrived in the Americas. In fact, during the African diaspora, the dispersion of Africans out of Africa, enslaved Africans managed to retain some aspects of their culture in their new environments, for exception of languages. With few exceptions, Africans were not able to transplant their languages into the Americas. The captives were spirited away from their communities, and they soon found themselves on ships among captives from all across West Africa and on some slave ships from across East Africa as well. Since captives were taken from myriad African culture groups, most did not share a common language. Understandably, they found it difficult, if not impossible, to communicate en route because of their linguistic isolation on ships, and in the Americas, most Africans lost their languages after a generation. Wow. In spite of this forced isolation from their cultures, West Africans managed to combine European colonizer languages, English, Spanish, French, or Portuguese, for example, with parts of their West African language and grammatical patterns to create new languages broadly known as Creole. Okay, so because the Caribbean islands had a larger concentration of enslaved Africans than did North America, Creole languages dominate even there today. In the United States, which had smaller percentage of Africans in comparison to the total population, few examples of Creole languages exist. One notable exception is the Gullah or the Geechee language of South Carolina and Georgia, in places where slaves once composed 75% of the population. Religions. African religions in the Americas provide powerful example of religious secretism, are the combining of different religious beliefs and practices. Africans melded aspects of Christianity that were introduced to them or imposed upon them with their West African religion traditions, such as drumming, dancing, and a belief in spirits that could possess or take over and act through a person, often in different ways. The traditions of the Santeria in Cuba, uh, the Voodoo or the Voodoo in Haiti, or the Camdoli in Brazil were all combinations of Christian and traditional African religions. Enslaved Africans in the United States also laid the roots for the African American church, a hybrid of Christianity and African spiritual traditions that remains one of the oldest and most stable institutions in Africa American communities today. Some enslaved Africans, maybe 10% to 20%, practice Islam, while some of the men who sailed with Columbus may have been Muslims. These enslaved Africans became the first significant presence of Islam in the Americas. So, saying the Africans that came with Christopher Columbus, which they probably got on record um, in 1492, that came with him, they was from Islamic tradition. They practiced Islam, and probably went to Timbuktu, was learned in the culture and the science and everything like that, because they had to help them get here on the ship. Just common sense, you know what I'm saying? And I got in here too where the Moroccans, when they invaded, they took a lot of scholars back with them to Morocco too as well. You know, so that was just something I was reading. I'm gonna do part 2 tomorrow on this. We gonna get into the music, the food, effects of the slave trade on Africa. Then we're gonna get to the end of the Atlantic slave trade. So that was part 1 for tonight. You know what I'm saying? Y'all see I changed the name on the YouTube. You know, it's Fire Knowledge Unveiled. Now I think that sounds a little bit more revealing to people. We breaking down the knowledge. We giving you that heat, being consistent. You know, follow me on Instagram at Off the Chill Fetty, Twitter at Chill Fetty, Snapchat Off the Chill Fetty. You know what I mean? TikTok Off the Chill Fetty. Follow your boy, like and subscribe. Pass the word around. We're getting into it this year. I'm working on a new book too as well. That'll probably be out probably about 2-3 more months, you know. So got a lot of material coming. Just keep grinding, keep shining, know thyself, stand on your square, all 10. Keep it up there, for sure. We gone, man. Fire Knowledge Unveiled. Like and subscribe, and please follow.